Someone asks you for a favor you don't have time for. You feel the no forming in your chest, and somehow, out loud, what comes out is, sure, no problem. That's strange, isn't it? You didn't decide to say yes, it just happened, faster than you could think it through. Here's the reframe. People-pleasing isn't really about being nice. It's a safety strategy, one your nervous system learned a long time ago, built around a very specific belief: if I keep everyone comfortable, I stay safe. Saying yes doesn't feel like a choice in that moment because, in a sense, it isn't one. It's closer to a reflex. John Bowlby, whose work on attachment theory looked at how children learn to stay close to the people they depend on, described how early relationships teach a nervous system what keeps connection intact. If your environment growing up rewarded agreeableness and quietly punished pushback, even mild pushback, your brain learned an equation early. Someone else's disappointment equals danger to the relationship. That equation doesn't expire just because you grew up. It keeps running quietly in the background, long after the original reason for it has disappeared. Think about what actually happens in your body in the second before you say yes. There's rarely a calm, considered thought like, I have the time and energy for this. More often, there's a flicker of tension, a fast mental scan of how the other person might react if you said no, and then the yes arrives before the scan even finishes. That sequence is a threat response, not a decision. Your brain isn't weighing your schedule. It's weighing the risk of someone else's disapproval and treating that risk as more urgent than your own bandwidth. B.F. Skinner's research on reinforcement offers a useful piece here. He found that behavior reinforced unpredictably, sometimes rewarded, sometimes not, becomes more resistant to change than behavior rewarded every single time. Approval works exactly like this. Not everyone responds warmly every time you agree to something. Sometimes your effort goes unnoticed, but every so often, someone reacts with real gratitude or relief, and that occasional payoff is enough to keep the whole pattern running indefinitely. You're not chasing constant approval, you're chasing the unpredictable moments when it lands, which, ironically, makes the habit far harder to walk back than if it worked every time. There's also a subtler mechanic at play, one the psychologist Robert Cialdini described in his research on influence. People tend to feel obligated to reciprocate, to stay consistent with commitments they've already made, and to go along with what feels socially expected in the moment. Once you've said yes a few times in a relationship or a workplace, saying no later doesn't just risk disappointing someone. It risks looking inconsistent, like you're suddenly breaking a pattern others have come to expect. That inconsistency feels, to a people-pleasing brain, almost like a small social violation, even when no actual promise was broken. There's an identity layer underneath all of this too. Leon Festinger's research on cognitive consistency found that people work hard to keep their self-image stable, even when maintaining that image costs them. If you've spent years being known as the reliable one, the easy one, the person who always says yes, that reputation becomes part of how you see yourself, not just how others see you. Turning down a request doesn't just risk someone else's disappointment, it risks a small identity crisis. A moment where you have to reconcile being the dependable person you believe yourself to be with the fact that you just said no. For many people, avoiding that internal friction feels more urgent in the moment than protecting their own time. Think about how this plays out in an ordinary week. You agree to take on a task at work that isn't yours because saying no in the meeting felt too exposed. You say yes to plans you don't want to attend because canceling feels like it would let someone down. You laugh at a comment that didn't sit right because correcting it felt like it would create tension. None of these moments feel like big decisions in isolation. But stacked together, they form a pattern where your actual preferences rarely make it into the room. Modern communication makes this pattern harder to escape, not easier. A text left unanswered for a few hours can read, to the sender, as coldness. A slow reply at work can look like disengagement. Read receipts and instant messaging have quietly shortened the acceptable gap between someone reaching out and you responding, which means the window you have to actually think before answering has shrunk dramatically. Where you once might have had a day to consider a request, you now feel pressure to respond within minutes, which leaves far less space for the honest answer and far more space for the automatic one. Workplaces amplify this in a specific, almost invisible way. The person who says yes most often tends to get asked most often, which quietly increases their workload without anyone ever framing it as a punishment. It looks from the outside like being valued and trusted. From the inside, it can feel like being the only person in the room who never gets to say no. And because the requests keep coming through the same channels, chat messages, quick calls, hallway asks, there's rarely a clear moment to step back and notice that the pattern has been building for months, not just this one afternoon. Here's the counterintuitive part. People-pleasing often isn't primarily about the other person at all. It's about managing your own discomfort. The relief you feel after saying yes isn't relief that they're happy. It's relief that the moment of possible conflict has passed. Roy Baumeister, who studied self-control and what he called ego depletion, found that resisting an impulse draws on a limited resource, one that gets harder to sustain the more you use it in a day. Saying no requires exactly this kind of resistance, overriding the automatic yes long enough to consider what you actually want. By the end of a long day full of small decisions, that resistance is often the first thing to run out, which is why the yes seems to arrive most easily exactly when you're most depleted. This creates a strange side effect many people don't expect. When you say yes to almost everything, your yes stops carrying much information. People around you can no longer tell the difference between your enthusiastic agreement and your reluctant, exhausted compliance because from the outside, both look identical. Paradoxically, constant agreeableness can make you harder to trust, not easier, because no one can tell what you actually want underneath it. This is not a character flaw, and it doesn't mean you're weak or overly passive. For many people, people-pleasing was, at some point, a genuinely useful strategy, one that kept the peace in an unpredictable household, or maintained approval in an environment where approval felt conditional. The behavior made sense given where it came from. It simply hasn't been updated to reflect a present where the same level of vigilance usually isn't required anymore. None of this means you need to start saying no to everything, or that every yes you give is secretly dishonest. Plenty of yeses are genuine. The goal isn't to reverse the pattern completely. It's to create a small pause between the request and the response, long enough to notice whether the yes is coming from actual willingness or from that fast, automatic scan for disapproval. Even a few seconds of hesitation, something like, "Let me check and get back to you," interrupts the reflex enough to let a real answer catch up. So the next time someone asks you for something and you feel the no rising in your chest before the yes takes over anyway, pause on that exact moment. It's not proof that you don't have boundaries. It's proof that your nervous system is still running an old equation, one where someone else's comfort mattered more than your own. And the next time that equation runs, you get to decide whether to let it finish or whether to answer the question yourself.